Forged on the gridiron in September. Perfected in the magic of March. For the fans who love the crunch of the pads. Prefer a dunk. And expect nothing but the best. This was the Big Ten. Now this is Bigger Ten. Here's Steve Dace.
Greetings. Welcome to a new episode of Bigger Ten. I am Steve Dace. He's Aaron McIntyre. And indeed, Aaron, today is July 1 as of the time we are taping this. And it is officially today a Bigger Ten. USC, UCLA, Washington, and Oregon get officially welcomed with the start of the new fiscal year into the Big Ten Conference. It is now a whopping 18 teams. And who knows? I think we both know it's not going to stop there. Ugh. So your thoughts on this historic day here in our conference?
Congratulations to everybody. I mean, this is expansion day for everybody except for Cal and Stanford for some reason. They join later this month. I heard that on Sirius XM the other day. I don't understand. Who cares? It's
California.
ACC.
It's California, yeah.
Because California is now a part of the Atlantic Coastal Conference.
Just call the
now.
ACC the All-Coast Conference and get it over with, by the way.
Actually, that's a good idea.
Yeah. Anyway.
Not a bad idea.
Yeah.
So, yeah, this is officially Bigger Ten Day, and congratulations to all who celebrate, including the 4 new teams, UCLA, USC, Oregon, Washington. We're excited, I guess, to have you here. We don't know anything about you. We don't know much about you. Maybe you'll tell us about you. Hopefully you're finding this podcast for the first time. You are our Big Ten brethren. I have nothing specifically against y'all. I don't know what your I don't know what your fan bases are like. So I guess welcome.
Yeah, it's not you. It's not personal. It's just
we don't know you.
It's just weird, man. It's just weird. I'm sure it's weird for you too. Okay. Over time, we'll get to know one another, but it's weird. Let's do something. Let's restore some form of tradition here from the outset, if you don't mind. Let's do this. Every year on the show, we go through Phil Steele's college football preview and find out what he's got to say about the upcoming Big Ten football season. And even though he's got more to say than ever before with 18 teams now in our league, it still is a little comforting that there's still some traditions still available to us. You ready to go through?
Let's do it.
What Phil has to say. Let's do it. All right, let's start here. Phil says, based on how many players they lost to the NFL draft, there is at least a 70% chance these teams will have the same or worse record from last year. Washington, Michigan, Penn State, Ohio State, Illinois, and Iowa. Now, Aaron, we say this as we're going to go through and discuss these one by one, but you're going to see some teams pop up on lists that are going to contradict each other. What you're really looking for is if a team shows up on multiple lists that are all pointing in one direction or another, that's kind of what you're looking for. So, like last year, Michigan and Ohio State were on here for players they lost to the NFL draft as well, and they did okay.
Yeah.
They did okay.
Like a worse record could be 10-2 for Ohio State. That's still going to the college football playoff.
Correct. Yeah. So there's probably, other than seeing Illinois there, who didn't even make a bowl game last year, that's kind of a bit of a surprise. Other than that, these names are pretty much here every single year.
Even if you're at Iowa, 9-3 is still a worse record. That's still going to be a really good record this season. So, I think Washington is the one on this list. And having seen a few previews for them, did I see right? They only have 3. Now, they did well in the transfer portal. 3 returning starters, and 2 of them are the punter and kicker.
The least production of any power conference team returning in the country, yeah.
That is ridiculous. And love Jed Fish. He's still got his work cut out for him, though.
Indeed. All right, next from Phil. These are first-team All-Americans that he has from the Big Ten. Colston Loveland, the tight end at Michigan. Donovan Jackson, the interior offensive lineman at Ohio State. Tyleik Williams, the defensive tackle at Ohio State. Jay Higgins, the linebacker at Iowa. Will Johnson, the corner at Michigan. He has 16 other Big Ten players, either second, third, or fourth team. Maybe I'm a homer. I was stunned not to see Mason Graham on his All-American team. I don't know how you put Tyleik Williams there and not Mason Graham. Guy almost won the Rose Bowl by himself. Okay, but anyway, everybody else on that list, I think, deserves to be there. But your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't have any huge problems with this. I was surprised about Mason Graham. I mean, he's going to be... What year is he this year? Is he true junior? So, I mean, he's going to be in the NFL next year, I'd have to think. So that's the only major surprise. I don't have really any squabbles with the rest of that list.
Okay. And 16 would seem like a lot, but we have 18 teams.
Correct.
Yeah. All right, national position unit rankings, and there's 2 posts where this is concerned, so we'll do them together, Aaron. He's got Oregon as the only Big Ten team with top 10 quarterbacks in the country. He has Ohio State, Penn State, and Michigan, and Minnesota, I should say, as top 10 in the running backs. Oregon is number 1 at receiver over Ohio State. And USC is also in the top 10. Oregon as a top 10 and is the only Big Ten team in the top 10 at the offensive line. Ohio State is number 1 in the country on the defensive line, with Penn State, Michigan, and Nebraska also in the top 10. And as for the rest of Phil's position rankings, he's got Iowa with the best linebackers in the country, with Penn State, Oregon, and Wisconsin in the top 10. Ohio State is number 1 in DBs, with Iowa, Michigan, and Penn State in the top 10. And then Michigan, USC, Penn State, and Iowa are also top 10 in special teams.
I want to make kind of an overarching observation on these position group ratings. As I'm reading through my preseason magazines, same ones that you read as well, I'm noticing a common theme, and this is common for a lot of teams, but it shouldn't be in the Big Ten, or the Big Two, really, in the Big Ten and SEC. Having not gone through Phil's magazine quite yet, I don't know what the rest of the rankings look like, what conferences represent where, particularly at the position group I want to talk about. You'll notice that the Big Ten there is dominant, seemingly, at least in the one featured positions there, on one side of the ball. As I'm reading through my preview magazines, there is a consistent theme, especially in the Big Ten. Questions at offensive line, questions at offensive line, questions at offensive line, over and over again. We've got 18 teams. 5, I would say, are bona fide blue bloods in my mind. Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan, USC, and Oregon. I would say those. 2 should be. That would be Nebraska, and then a rotating cast of maybe Nebraska, Washington, depending on the year. But 5 bona fide year in and year out blue bloods. And we've got 1 team in a top 10 offensive line represented there. I'm wondering, is the Big Ten a defensive conference known for its defense?
Yes.
Because its offensive lines suck? Because that's the building block of an offense. At the end of the day, you can scheme yourself to death, but at the end of the day, your offensive line, I'm seeing that across the board in the Big Ten as questions at offensive line, questions at offensive line. Questions at offensive line at Michigan or Ohio State, it's going to be different than they are at Minnesota or even Wisconsin or Iowa. But I don't know. Do you think we're skewed defensively just because our offenses suck?
That is a question that a lot of people started asking last year. And then you saw Michigan come in and derail Alabama's offense that beat Georgia and then shut down what was the absolute best offense in college football last year in Washington. So I don't know the answer. Ohio State's defense played very well against Missouri in the bowl game with no complimentary offense at all. They were down to their third string quarterback. Iowa's defense got completely, annulled. I mean, it wasn't even destroyed. It was annulled by a Tennessee quarterback who never even started a game. So I don't know the answer. It's probably a little bit of both. I love Phil to death. He's got Michigan's offensive line ranked with New Mexico State. Okay. If Michigan's offensive line finishes the year ranked with New Mexico State, I retire. It's not going to happen. So how some of these work out, if there's only one Big Ten team in the top 10 offensive lines at the end of the year, I'll be a mother's uncle. That's not going to happen either, So I don't know.
All right, let's move on.
Okay. Phil has Purdue as his lone Big Ten bull market team, which gives the Boilermakers 70% odds to improve last year's 4-8 record. He has Washington and Northwestern as bear market teams, meaning they're the 2 most likely to be down from a year ago teams in the Big Ten. Washington, of course, national runner-up, 14-1. Northwestern ended up going 8-5 and winning a bowl game and one of the great interim coaching jobs of all time in the Big Ten. But Phil does not see a repeat for either one of those teams in 2024. Yeah,
as we discussed in passing, at the top of this list, I can see that when it comes to Washington, especially. You just cannot lose. I mean, it'd be one thing if, Kalen DeBoer stayed there. It'd still be a really tough transition moving on from Michael Penix and all of the talent that they lost. But when you bring in a new coaching staff, as much as, we think of Jed Fish, and you lose that production, you did bring in some good pieces from the transfer portal. That's still just going to be a tough slog. And, you won a lot of games last year, too. And Northwestern, We'll see if this is a flash in the pan. It seems, I don't know, if you did such a good coaching job last year, it seems like that's the kind of coach you are. I mean, everything was stacked against them last year. But again,
in other words, how can he possibly face a harder situation than last year?
Correct. Yeah, correct. I don't get the Boilers. Now, they had a tough, They had a slog last year, not in terms of schedule, but in terms of how many games they won. So again, this is like 6 of one, half dozen of the others. I wouldn't say I'm bullish. If winning one more game than they did last year is bull market, I guess I can redefine bull market now. But
yeah, I mean they had 3 difference makers on their team last year. One was a true freshman. He's back. The other 2 guys cashed in the transfer portal and are now the best wide receiver at Oklahoma and the best rush coming off the edge rush end at Texas A&M. Hudson Card is a turnover machine at quarterback. He's one of the more gifted quarterbacks in the league, but he's a kind of a turnover machine. I don't know. That kind of surprised me. As also, Purdue's schedule is, pardon the pun, a bear.
Yeah, I'm WNLing this. I mean, Indiana State, they should win. Notre Dame, no.
After
Oregon
Indiana State, tell me the game they're a definitive favorite the rest of the year.
Nebraska, no. Wisconsin, no. Illinois, that's a toss-up. Oregon, no. Northwestern, probably toss-up. Ohio State, no. Penn State, no. Michigan State, I don't know.
Is that at home?
Indiana.
If it's home, maybe
Michigan
they're favored?
State, no, it's on the road at Michigan State.
Can't definitively say they're favored in that one?
Maybe Indiana.
I don't think you can definitively say they're the favorite in that one.
So, I'm not really sure what I see.
Yeah, I mean, put it this way, though. In deference to Phil, who I know I just took a shot at for ranking Michigan's offensive line with New Mexico State's, and he deserved the shot for that. But my overall respect for him is such that we spend 15, 20 minutes discussing his magazine on our show every year, and it was enough for me to keep me off of Purdue under the season win total as one of my best bet win totals on our Patreon side. So let it be known I do have respect for Phil's trends to some degree. Okay. Based on year-to-year randomness of close game results, Phil says there's a 75% chance Nebraska improves from a year ago, although Nebraska has probably been on Phil's list here like 5 years in a row.
Yep.
Okay. While there's an 85% chance Washington, Northwestern, and Iowa take a step back given the amount of close games they won last year, which you're going to keep Iowa, put a bookmark there when we get to the end.
I know.
Because you're going to see something at the end that totally contradicts this. But anyway, Aaron, go ahead.
Well, it's a July tradition unlike any other. I mean, we've already been through it a couple weeks ago when we opened up. I keep saying, show me with Nebraska. It's under...
They can't lose all those close games another year in a row.
That's what I'm saying. This is our July tradition with Nebraska. It's uncanny. And as much as I want to give, I mean, it was just ugly towards the end of Scott Frost's tenure over in Lincoln. It was just ugly, just nasty. I mean, he had a lot of talent still lost close games. You know, Matt Rule, love him to death. I think the culture is changing there, and then culture is a buzzword this time of year as well, for a good reason. But he lost a lot of close games last year, too. I don't know. When is the point where it's just like self-evident that you are snake bit? Will we see that this year with Nebraska? Because usually, most of the time, in the Rule bump, that's kind of the thing. In year 2, that's kind of when he's turned programs around. If they can't win close games, figure out how to win close games. And I'm making a low bar. If they're in 2 games in the last third of their season, and if they're in 2 close games the last third of their season, can they tie it or win those games? Just 2 out of the last 4. Can they tie it or win it? That, to me, would be improvement, because that's how bad they have been in these close games. It's like, okay, flip a heads I win, tails you lose, or tails I lose, tails for like the last 4 or 5 seasons, regardless of who is the coach. So again, I'm just looking for small bumps. If they are in close games 2 out of the last 4 games, the last third of the season, can they hit heads twice there? To me, that would be improvement, because otherwise, in 2025, when Florida State and Miami are in the Big Ten, and I'm all jacked up from having to redo these graphics again with the help of Go Blue 982, I'm kind of tired of this tradition. As much as I not pains me as much as I like it as an Iowa fan. It's just the same thing every single year.
Why do I get the sense if they just were to have like one breakthrough, I should say?
See, that's what it feels like.
They'd win like the next 15 close games in a row.
That's what it feels like.
Yeah. All right, let's continue on with Phil and his trends. Next up, Phil says, given the weakness of their schedule, he gives Indiana and Rutgers 81% odds to improve on last year's record. So for Rutgers, that would be 6-6. For Indiana, that would be 3-9. And then 86% odds, UCLA, who was 8-5, Michigan, who was 15-0. There's only one way for Michigan to go, so that's pretty obvious. Washington, who was 14-1, and Northwestern, who was 8-5, they will be worse given their upgraded schedule strengths. I don't disagree with necessarily any of those.
No.
Yeah. We have next, Nebraska is the only Big Ten team expected to improve based on Phil's famous, and this is the stat that made Phil a star. Turnovers equals turnaround trend. Nebraska is the only Big Ten team on the positive side of that. But he has Michigan, Penn State, and there's Northwestern again. See what we said at the top? If you see trends that are all going in one direction, and you're seeing that with Northwestern on all of these, okay?
Yep.
So he has Michigan and Penn State, Northwestern. They are due for a dip. Again, Michigan was plus 19 in turnover margin last year. There's only one way to go for them too. Michigan could be plus 12. And that's like a 70% decline. Yeah. Okay. So I don't disagree. But back to what we said about Nebraska, they've probably been on here how many years in a row, Aaron? At some point, you got to think at some point there's regression to the mean the other way, but we've been waiting for that since 2016.
Yeah. And remind me, you might have just said it and I tuned out. Is this turnover ratio or just raw turnovers?
It's turnover ratio. Yeah.
So it's when we're talking about turnover ratio, yes, I always preach this: defense, unlike offense, even at the skill positions on defense, a lot of it is a choice. Yes, you can form tackle. Yes, you can just not make business decisions and actually go in and stick your nose in there. Defense is a choice. I always say, regardless of what sport it is, especially in football, basketball, you can't just choose to let the other team turn it over. That's just really hard to do. So yes, this is the one stat where it is, I think, in the predictive markets, it's reliable, and Phil has proven this. It's reliable to try to bank on going into a season, because you can look at statistical outliers and just say that's way above the norm or way below the norm. Regression, progression to the mean. This is the stat that does it, because otherwise you're just kind of looking at modeling. You're looking at subjective takes on data. Turnovers, it's just, is this above or below the average or mean or whatever? And I think you can make pretty good deductions from there.
And when I say this is the stat that made Phil a star, with the legalization of sports betting and the proliferation of advanced metrics, I should maybe quantify that really quick. Phil was really the pioneer with all this stuff. I mean, how did we find out that turnovers were random, largely random? Phil, and he had a team of researchers. They spent years where they just researched all this stuff via box scores the old-fashioned way. And the amount of work that him and his team were willing to do to come up with these kinds of stats to get ahead of markets, because Phil writes this book. There's a reason why it's the book that bettors buy. He writes it primarily for bettors, because that's that's his background. And the work that they went through to dig this kind of stuff up, that now advanced metrics, just, you go to R-Lads or, Football Insiders or Warren Sharp or Bill Connolly at ESPN Plus, and you get all these advanced metrics now. And this is what put them ahead of what are called the counting stats that the average Joe can just look up their total defense and they're ahead. Well, there's more to it than that, right? And so they found all these angles on their own to get ahead in betting markets. And this was the granddaddy of all of them, the randomness of turnovers and how they tend to progress and regress year to year based on largely randomness. That was revolutionary at the time in the 90s when he came up with this kind of stuff, because no one had this information at their fingertips like we all can now, especially if you're willing to pay for it. So that's what we mean by that. All right, next up. After a 2-year flop, Phil's surprise teams, his surprise teams picks, they surged last year. Well, as the only Big Ten team on the list, Iowa is hoping that continues this season. Phil also names Indiana and Nebraska among his most improved. So Indiana showed up here a couple of times, but much like Northwestern keeps showing up with the negative trends, Nebraska keeps showing up with the positive trends. And you will see what Phil means by Iowa as his only Big Ten surprise team at the very end of our montage here.
Iowa really doesn't have that tough of a schedule. It really doesn't.
As serviceable as you can get, given the strength of the conference, it's a tough schedule. But given how tough it could be, given the strength of the conference, it's the most serviceable an Iowa could ask for, probably.
There's really only one road game that's like a definite L, if you were penciling it in now, and that's at Ohio State. Mm-hmm. But Iowa's got a week off ahead of that. I mean, I'm not predicting Iowa to win, and I won't then probably as well, unless bad things happen to Ohio State and Tim Lester is magically Andy Reid 2.0 all of a sudden. But Iowa really doesn't have that tough of a schedule, so I wonder how much that factored into his math on predicting a surge for Iowa.
Mm-hmm. All right, Phil projects an Ohio State-Oregon Big Ten title game, and according to Phil's rankings, this would be his playoff field. So Georgia, champion of the SEC, Ohio State, champion of the Big Ten, Utah, champion of the Big 12 now. And then Miami of Florida, he has the champion of the ACC. Those 4 teams would receive byes as the highest-ranked conference champions. The rest of his playoff field would be Boise State as the group of 5 representative would play at 5th-seeded Oregon, 11th-seeded Iowa. So there you are with Iowa as his only surprise team out of the Big Ten. He has Iowa in the football or in the college football playoff as an at-large team. They would be at 6th-seeded Texas. 10th-seeded Michigan would begin defense of its national champion at a familiar foe. 7th-seeded Penn State. You know that would be a whiteout, right? Yeah. And could you imagine a whiteout playoff atmosphere?
Game.
Oh my goodness, that'd be insanely cool. Yeah. And then 9th-seeded Alabama at 8th-seeded Notre Dame. They'd have to come north in December and play there under the Golden Dome. I mean, all these playoff fields look pretty cool when you lay them out. This one looks pretty cool too, frankly.
Yeah. Northwest, regional matchup there between Boise State and Oregon. That's cool. Iowa going down to the warmth maybe of Austin. You never know. It's kind of a crapshoot in December and January and in South Central Texas. Michigan at Penn State. That's also compelling for the reason you just laid out. And Alabama, Notre Dame, wasn't that a title game about 10 years ago?
Yeah, 2012.
Yeah.
They used to play it quite often in the non-conference too back in the day.
Yeah, that would be a compelling matchup. I don't see Iowa in the college football playoff. As easy as a schedule as they have, I don't see it.
Now, leave that up there for a second. Now, what would happen in the next round is the Alabama-Notre Dame winner. So what happens is the 4 teams that get byes by order of ranking get to decide which of the bowl games they want to play in the semifinals, okay? So Alabama-Notre Dame winner would play Georgia likely in the Sugar Bowl. The Michigan-Penn State winner would likely play Ohio State in the Rose Bowl. The Iowa-Texas winner would likely play Utah in the Fiesta Bowl. And the Boise State-Oregon winner would likely play Miami. I think that's in the Peach Bowl.
Peach Bowl, okay.
The Orange and Cotton are the semifinals.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. So actually, I can see Georgia in the Peach Bowl. I take that back. Georgia would whether go to the Peach Bowl. And so the Boise State-Oregon winner would probably be facing Miami in that case, probably in the Sugar Bowl.
Man. As much belly aching as there has been, I've done some of it myself. It's kind of fun, actually.
It is kind of fun looking at it. It is. No, is it worth? Could this have been done without all of the carnage? Yep. See, it could have been done without all of the carnage. Okay.
Yeah, I can't wait to get to our feedback of the week as well.
All right. That'll do it for what Phil Steele has to say about the upcoming Big Ten football season. Congratulations to the Iowa Hawkeyes for making the very first college football playoff.
Thank you.
According to Phil. All right, we'll come back, and when we do, it'll be our first game of Would You Rather here in the new season. Stay tuned. All right, Aaron, let's play some Would You Rather. I will begin. Aaron, would you rather bet Ohio State's 10.5 win total under or Michigan's 9.5 win total over? Which bet would you rather make?
This is tough.
That's why I picked it. I thought it was tough too.
Because I could see both of these happening. I could see both of them. Is it mathematically possible for both of them to happen?
Yes, they could both be 10-2.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to go Ohio State's. I'm going to go Ohio State's under. I need to know what the juice is. Maybe there's a little bit of plus money.
That's true. Yeah.
But I would imagine it's probably plus money taking. It's more likely to be plus money taking the under
in Ohio State
than the plus money taking Michigan's over.
That's a good way of looking at it. Yeah.
So I would take the under because I could see Ohio State losing at Oregon because they have to go all the way out to Oregon. I could also see them losing to Michigan again with all of the pressure. Yeah, and they're at Penn State as well.
Basically, this is my way of asking you: what do I think is more likely? Ohio State loses 2 out of these 3 at Oregon, at Penn State, or Michigan. Or Michigan wins 2 out of these 3, Texas at home, Oregon at home, at Ohio State. And that's a pretty tough call.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I would rather bank on losing than winning, if that makes sense.
Okay, makes sense. You bet. Yeah.
This is from me. Would you rather bet Drew Aller or Travion Henderson to win the Heisman?
Drew Aller without question.
Aller is at 45-1. Travion Henderson 80-1.
Drew Aller without question. For one simple reason. Quinshon Judkins. I love Travion Henderson. You know, dude, I picked him to be a Heisman Trophy finalist 2 years ago. Okay? Phenomenal player. But with Quinshon Judkins coming in from Ole Miss, he's just not going to get the carries and stats unless Judkins gets hurt.
Yeah.
You know, so he's not going to, there's not, and a running back has got to, you got to rush for like at least 1,800 yards nowadays probably as a running back, or you've got like 1,000, 1,200 rushing yards, 800 receiving yards, something like that. And I just don't see Travion Henderson getting those kinds of touches with Quinshon Judkins. Plus, there's going to be a lot of games where they're just blowing guys out, and they're not going to want to add carries onto him at the same time. Where Drew Aller will be the focal point of that offense, and they've got a very friendly schedule, but they'll be in enough big games. They play Ohio State, we mentioned already. They play Wisconsin. They play USC. They open up at West Virginia. That if he has we keep talking like this kid sucked, and he had a 25-2 touchdown interception ratio. Okay. He wasn't, listen, he struggled throwing the ball down the field, but he didn't suck. Okay. I would much rather bet Drew Aller for sure.
Makes sense.
All right. For you, when the Big Ten adds at least 2 more teams in the not too distant future, would you rather continue without divisions and very unbalanced schedules, or go with this plan? So let's assume we add in Miami and Florida State. All right, because I don't believe the state legislature will let North Carolina depart from NC State or Duke. And it's already known that the state legislature in Virginia will not let Virginia and Virginia Tech, as of now, separate. Okay? So let's assume Clemson goes to the SEC and the Big Ten adds Florida State and Miami. And Miami is an AAU school, by the way, and Florida State's close. All right? You could divide these geographically. All right? So in alphabetical order, all these schools, I believe, are in the Eastern time zone now. Indiana, Florida State, Maryland, Miami, Michigan, Michigan State, Ohio State, Penn State, Purdue, and Rutgers would be the East. The West would be Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota, Nebraska, Northwestern, Oregon, UCLA, USC, Washington, and Wisconsin. Okay? And so you would divide them into those 2 divisions. Furthermore, what I would do, if even beyond this, is this would be your conference schedule every year. You would play these 9 teams. You'd play every team in your division. No unbalanced schedules. Yeah. You'd play your entire division, a full round robin every year. No crossovers, no rematches in the Big Ten title game to restore kind of the luster of regionalization and make Michigan, USC, and Ohio State, Oregon special like it was when they played in Rose Bowls when we were growing up. Okay? I would do that too. So that would be my plan. You have 2 10-team divisions. It goes back to being really the Big Ten. You still get marquee matchups every year. You're going to get USC and Oregon and USC and UCLA and USC and Washington. You're going to get that game every single year. You're going to get Michigan, Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan, Miami, Michigan, Florida State, Penn State, Florida State, Ohio State, Florida State. Plenty of marquee matchups are going to definitely happen for the networks every single year, but there's some regional mystery restored, and it makes the curiosity factor of the Big Ten championship game rises all the more, I think, with no shot of a rematch.
I think this is an inspired idea. I think this is one of my kind of channeling in a different way my 4-division idea for the Big Ten that we talked about, I believe, in passing last offseason, or maybe it was the offseason before. I love this idea. I think it's inspired. I love the idea of making sure the titled game is still special. You could even move that if you want to
the Rose Bowl.
To the Rose Bowl, which is my idea as well. Maybe both of our ideas. I can't remember. Yeah. I love it. I think it's inspired. Never going to happen. Never going to happen. Because you're trying to make things special. Here's how the TV executives think. This is not going to happen until you get rid of the round robin part. If you go to an 11-game conference schedule where 2 games are
so
non-divisional,
there could be 2 crossovers,
because TV executives do not want to rely on the chance of Oregon versus Ohio State or USC versus Michigan in the title game. They want to schedule at least 2 or 3 of those just ridiculous marquee matchups every single year. They don't want to rely on chance, but I think that's an inspired idea nonetheless, and that's what they should do. It would restore some mystique instead of, forcing it down our throats, but I don't know if we'll ever see an 11-game or even 10-game conference schedule, but they need to have some cross-play. If they ever go back to divisions, they have to have some cross-play so that TV networks can count on those ridiculously big-name, big-brand matchups every single year, not just in the Big Ten championship game.
All right.
Finally, for you, I think this is a package deal as well. I'm not sure what the Florida legislature has said, but this is just a way of gauging which one you think is a better add to the Big Ten. Would you rather take Miami of Florida or Florida State to the Big Ten if it came down of choosing one?
I would rather take Miami. They're already an AAU school. Direct flights from major cities and ports in the Big Ten to Miami are easier to obtain than it is in terms of getting direct routes to Tallahassee and travel there. Miami is the weaker program. And it comes from the more recruiting-rich area of the state. So it's a better academic school. It comes from the best recruiting region. I mean, the Miami programs that I grew up with that were built by Schnellenberger and Jimmy Johnson and Dennis Erickson almost recruited Miami-Dade County exclusively. Like almost all their players came from that area. So you would get a more fertile recruiting region, easier travel, especially when you're talking about Olympic sports, and you're getting the better academic school. And at the same time, I just don't think that they come in I don't think it's very likely. Well, I can't say likely. It is less likely that we will turn Florida State or Miami into a monster by bringing them into our league than it is that we will turn Florida State into a monster. They've already got an on-campus facility. They've been better at football the last 20 years. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like we might rue the day. The checks are clearing, but they're kicking our ass, kind of a thing. You know what I'm saying? And I think there's much less of a chance of that bringing Miami in.
Locking down South Florida and Southern California.
Mm-hmm. In terms of recruiting regions,
yep.
Yeah. I mean, we're talking, folks, those areas are so dense with talent that guys that are honorable mention all county are good enough to start at the majority of Big Ten schools. Yeah.
Missouri or Florida State, if we were able to poach Missouri?
I'd still take Florida State in that case for the recruiting because, at this point, I don't know what Missouri adds.
Yeah.
Now, I do think, like we said before, that if Jim Delaney could have looked into the future and saw he was getting this version of Nebraska, he'd have taken Missouri instead. Yep. But it is what it is. All right, we'll come back. We'll wrap things up with feedback of the week here in a moment. This week's Twitter poll, we asked you, would you be in favor of the Big Ten adding 2 more teams for an even 20 and then returning to 2 10-team divisions in football with each winner then meeting in the conference championship title game each year? 71% said yes, Aaron. 29% said no.
I was one of the ones who said yes. Thought it was an inspired idea. Just never going to happen.
And then that brings us to our feedback of the week. Bama Conservative says the NCAA should step in and create 8 geographical conferences with an equal amount of schools. The NYC, the NEC, SEC, and SWC would be the 4 top-tier conferences and have second-tier conferences for the smaller schools.
That's a great idea. Who should step in?
The NCAA. Yeah.
What's the only thing that they step in?
Very well.
Yeah, they don't
Very
have
well
that
put.
power.
Yeah.
And they won't for a long time. And that's
Yeah.
a great idea. That's kind of what we had.
Yeah, that is kind of what we had. They were called the Big Ten and the SEC and the Southwest Conference. And the joke that the new Big 12 needs to go back to calling itself the Southwest Conference, I found that to be.
Well, at least it's contiguous states.
Yeah, that's
That's
true.
something only them and the SEC can claim now, isn't it? In
Yes.
terms of power conferences.
Yes. Yeah. Here we are. The brave new world is now here. And something tells me it's only going to get newer.
Yeah.
We'll see if it's still braver. All right, that'll do it for this week's episode of Bigger 10. Don't forget to like, rate, subscribe, share, 5-star review. If you're watching right here on YouTube or listening elsewhere like iTunes, we would love it if you did those things. It helps us to find more Big Ten football fans just like you. We thank all of you for tuning in. Don't forget to follow us on X at Bigger10, at Bigger10 on X in between episodes. We love when you do that for us as well. For Aaron McIntyre, I'm Steve Dace. We'll see you next time right here on Bigger 10.
Thank you.